May 21st, 1995, Northern Greenland. 700 miles from the North Pole. After 2 years of back-breaking work in the most hostile environment on Earth, a team of aviation experts has just accomplished the impossible. They have restored a B-29 superfortress that's been frozen in the Arctic ice for 47 years. The engines are running, the propellers are spinning. They're minutes away from takeoff. This bomber, the Keybird, is one of the most perfectly preserved World War II aircraft ever found. When they discovered it in the ice, even the nose art was still intact. Aviation museums around the world have been watching this recovery. If they can fly it out, this plane is worth millions. The team leader, legendary test pilot Daryl Grenadier, climbs into the cockpit. He's been working toward this moment for 2 years. He's replaced all 4 engines. He's bulldozed a runway out of solid ice. He's risked his life dozens of times to make this happen. The engines roar to life. The plane begins to taxi across the frozen lake, and then someone notices smoke coming from the fuselage. Within 5 minutes, the Keybird will be completely engulfed in flames. Everything they've worked for will be destroyed. And the tragic irony? The plane that survived 47 years in the Arctic will be killed by a single mistake, a carelessly placed gas can. This is the story of the Keybird, the Cold War spy plane that vanished in 1947. The impossible rescue mission that almost succeeded. And the 5 minutes that broke the hearts of everyone who loved aviation history. Section 1. The secret mission. Before we understand how the Keybird was found and almost saved, you need to understand why it crashed in the first place. And that story begins with one of the most dangerous missions of the early Cold War, Project Nanook, February 20th, 1947. Less than 2 years after World War II ended, the United States and the Soviet Union are already enemies. The Cold War has begun. The U.S. Army Air Forces, soon to become the U.S. Air Force, launches a top-secret program called Project Nanook. The mission? Map the Arctic. Test polar navigation. And most importantly, search for Soviet military activity in one of the most remote places on Earth. The 46th Reconnaissance Squadron, stationed at Ladd Field near Fairbanks, Alaska, is assigned to fly B-29 superfortresses on long-range reconnaissance missions over Greenland and the North Pole. These aren't bombing runs. These planes have been modified into F-1-3 variants photo reconnaissance aircraft. The bomb bays are filled with extra fuel tanks instead of bombs. The crews carry cameras instead of ammunition. Their job is to see without being seen, and the missions are brutally dangerous. The Keybird and its crew. The aircraft assigned to this mission is B-29 serial number 4521768. The crew has nicknamed it the Keybird, named after a mythical Arctic bird that supposedly spends its winters screaming, "Ki ki ki wrist, it's cold." The bomber is massive, 99 feet long. 4 Wright R3350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower. Capable of flying 3,250 miles without refueling. It's one of the most advanced aircraft in the world. On February 20th, 1947, at 2:20 p.m. Alaska time, the Keybird takes off from Ladd Field with a crew of 11 men. Lieutenant Vern Arnett, the pilot. Lieutenant Russell Jordan, co-pilot. Lieutenant John Leisman, navigator. Lieutenant Burl Cowan, flight engineer. Lieutenant Robert Lutke, bombardier navigator. Lieutenant Talbot Gates, radar observer. Lieutenant Howard Adams, photographer. Master Sergeant Lawrence Yarborough, radio operator. Staff Sergeant Ernest Stewart, Central Fire Control. Technical Sergeant Robert Leader, radio operator. Staff Sergeant Paul McNamara, scanner. Their mission: fly to the geographic North Pole. Take photographs. Map the terrain. Search for any signs of Soviet activity. Then return to Ladd Field. The flight is expected to take between 12 and 20 hours. The Keybird is carrying enough fuel for 26 hours, plenty of buffer time. What could go wrong? Everything goes wrong. For the first several hours, the mission goes smoothly. The Keybird flies north, crossing the Arctic Circle, heading toward the pole. The crew takes their photographs. They record weather data. They maintain radio silence as ordered. But around midnight on February 21st, after they've passed over the North Pole and turned toward home Lieutenant, Arnett notices something troubling. They're burning fuel faster than expected. He checks the gauges, then checks them again. The numbers don't lie. At their current burn rate, they're not going to make it back to Lad Field. They might not even make it to the Canadian coast. And then the weather turns. A massive Arctic storm rolls in. Visibility drops to near zero. The navigation equipment starts giving unreliable readings. The crew tries to calculate their position using celestial navigation, but they can't see the stars through the storm. They're lost. They're running out of fuel. And they're somewhere over the most hostile environment on Earth. At 8 a.m. Alaska time on February 21st, the radio operator at Point Barrow CAA station picks up a distress call from the Keybird. We are lost. Storm conditions. 4 minutes of fuel remaining. We'll attempt emergency landing. And then silence. The crash landing. Lieutenant Vern Arnett is one of the best pilots in the squadron. He's flying one of the most expensive and advanced aircraft in the American military. Through the storm and the darkness, he spots something below, a frozen lake. It's small, maybe a mile across, surrounded by mountains, but it's flat. It's his only option. With the fuel gauges reading empty, Arnett brings the massive B-29 down. He's going to attempt a wheels-up belly landing on the ice. The plane descends. The crew braces for impact. The Keybird hits the frozen lake at over 100 miles per hour. The sound is deafening. The aircraft slides across the ice for hundreds of yards, snow and ice spraying in all directions. The propellers strike the surface, bending backwards. The fuselage shudders and groans, and then it stops. For a moment, nobody moves. Then, one by one, the crew realizes they're alive. All 11 of them. Not a single serious injury. They've just survived a crash landing in one of the most remote locations on Earth. But now comes an even harder question. How do they survive what comes next? Stranded in the Arctic, when the crew climbs out of the Keybird, they step into a nightmare. The temperature is 40 degrees below zero. The wind is howling at 30 miles per hour, driving the wind chill even lower. There's no shelter except the aircraft itself. No food except their survival rations. No way to call for help except the plane's radio, which only works if the batteries hold out. They're approximately 250 miles northeast of Toul, the nearest American base, and over 700 miles from the North Pole. This is one of the most remote places on the planet. Even if rescue is launched immediately, it could take days to find them. The crew sets up a survival camp inside the aircraft. They have some emergency supplies, sleeping bags, rations, a small heater. But the batteries powering the radio are dying. They need to conserve power. Radio operator Robert Leader starts sending out distress signals. He broadcasts their approximate position. He requests rescue. And then, to lighten the mood, when the radio operator at Latfield asks what they're doing in Greenland, Leader replies, "We came down to shoot a few polar bears." It's gallows humor. Because everyone knows, if rescue doesn't come soon, they're going to freeze to death. Section 2. The rescue back at Ladfield. The disappearance of the Keybird triggers one of the largest Arctic rescue operations in history. The problem? Nobody knows exactly where the plane is. The last position report was vague. The storm is still raging. And the Arctic in February means only a few hours of weak daylight per day. But the U.S. Army Air Forces launches everything they have. Operation Arctic Rescue, multiple B-29s take off from Ladfield, flying search patterns over Greenland. B-17s from the 5th Emergency Rescue Squadron join the hunt. Every available aircraft with enough range is sent north. The Keybird crew helps by using celestial navigation to calculate their position more accurately. They relay this information via radio during brief transmission windows to save battery power. On February 22nd, one day after the crash, a B-29 named Boeing's Boner spots the downed aircraft. The crew can see the Keybird on the frozen lake, surrounded by the 11 survivors who are waving frantically. The search plane makes multiple low passes, dropping emergency supplies, food, fuel for heating, coal for fires, additional survival gear. But they can't land. The lake is too small. The terrain too dangerous. A larger rescue aircraft, a C-54 transport, is dispatched. The pilot assesses the situation. The lake is barely long enough. The ice might not hold the weight. But there's no other option. On February 24th, 3 days after the crash, the C-54 lands on the same frozen lake where the Keybird sits stranded. All 11 crew members are evacuated. They're cold, exhausted, and mildly frostbitten, but alive. They fly to Westover Field in Massachusetts, then home to their families. The mission is considered a success. 11 men saved. But there's one problem. Before they leave, military command orders the crew to destroy all classified equipment aboard the Keybird, the radar system, the identification friend or foe transponder, the Loren navigation equipment. All classified materials are removed or destroyed, and then the Keybird is officially declared abandoned. She's left there, alone, on the frozen lake. 700 miles from the North Pole, a ghost plane in the Arctic ice. 38 years of silence for nearly 4 decades, the Keybird sits undisturbed. Snow piles up around the fuselage. The wings become buried in ice. The temperatures never rise above freezing, which means the aircraft doesn't rust or decay. It's essentially frozen in time. Nobody visits. Nobody checks on it. The military forgets about it. The world forgets about it. And then, in 1985, everything changes. Section 3. The Discovery in 1985. A British pilot flying over northern Greenland spots something impossible. From the air, he can see the outline of an aircraft on a frozen lake. The wings are still attached. The fuselage is intact. Even the tail section is recognizable. He takes photographs. He reports the discovery. And when aviation historians analyze the images, they realize what they're looking at: a virtually pristine B-29 superfortress, one of the most advanced bombers of World War II, still sitting exactly where it crashed 38 years ago. The aviation world goes crazy. The most valuable warbird in the world. By 1985, the B-29 is an extremely rare aircraft. Most were scrapped after the war. A few ended up in museums. Only one plane called Fifi is still flying, and the Keybird? It might be the most perfectly preserved B-29 in existence. Aviation museums start making inquiries. Private collectors express interest. The U.S. Air Force officially relinquishes all claims to the aircraft. It's been abandoned for decades, so anyone who can recover it can keep it. In the early 1990s, a team led by wreck recovery expert Gary Larkins makes an expedition to the crash site to assess the aircraft's condition. What they find is astonishing. The Keybird is in nearly perfect condition. Yes, the propellers are bent from the crash landing. Yes, there's some ice damage to the exterior, but the airframe is intact. The engines, though they haven't run in 47 years, are still attached. The control surfaces are functional. Even the original nose art is still visible on the fuselage. One member of the expedition says, "It's like the plane just landed yesterday and fell asleep." Most people assume the recovery will involve cutting the aircraft into pieces, airlifting the sections out, and reassembling it somewhere else. That's the standard procedure for salvaging crashed aircraft in remote locations. But one man has a different idea. A crazy idea. An impossible idea. His name is Darrell Greenamere, and he believes he can fly the Keybird out. Enter Darrell Greenamere. If anyone is crazy enough to attempt this, it's Greenamere. He's one of the most famous test pilots in America. He's set multiple speed records in modified aircraft. He once took an F-104 starfighter built from scrap parts and pushed it to speeds no one thought possible. He's also known for taking on projects that other people say are impossible. And when he sees the Keybird, he sees an opportunity. His plan: travel to Greenland, repair the aircraft on site, replace the engines, replace the propellers, get the plane airworthy, then fly it off the ice to Thule Air Force Base, where they can perform more extensive repairs before flying it back to the United States. People tell him he's insane. The plane has been sitting in sub-zero temperatures for 47 years. The engines are frozen solid. There's no infrastructure, no support, no safety net. If something goes wrong, they're 250 miles from the nearest help. Greenamere doesn't care. He forms a company, Key Bird LLC, raises funding, and assembles a team of aviation experts and mechanics. In July 1994, they fly to Greenland. They bring tools, equipment, and supplies. They also bring a 1962 de Havilland Caribou as a shuttle aircraft to transport parts from Thule Air Force Base to the crash site. And then they get to work. Section 4. The impossible restoration. The work is brutal. The conditions are impossible. But Greenland's team refuses to quit. Summer 1994. The first season, the first challenge is getting equipment to the crash site. The nearest road is hundreds of miles away. Everything has to be flown in using the Caribou shuttle plane. They bring 4 replacement Wright R3350 engines, 4 new propellers, new tires for the landing gear, an engine hoist, a bulldozer, fuel tools, food and shelter supplies. The team sets up a base camp on the ice. They work 16-hour days in temperatures that never rise above freezing. They use the bulldozer to clear snow and ice from around the aircraft. And then they start the real work, removing the old frozen engines. Each engine weighs over 2,700 pounds. They're frozen solid. The team has to use heaters and improvised tools to break them free from the ice. It takes days to remove a single engine. Then comes installation of the new engines. This normally takes place in a heated hangar with specialized equipment and trained technicians. Greenland's team is doing it on a frozen lake with hand tools and determination. One by one, the new engines are mounted. The propellers are attached. The tires are replaced. They're making progress. Slow, agonizing progress. But progress. And then tragedy strikes. The death of Rick Creed. Rick Creed is Greenland's chief engineer. He's the technical mastermind behind the entire operation. Without him, the project might not be possible. In late summer 1994, as winter begins to approach, Creed starts feeling ill. At first, it seems minor fatigue, some pain. But it gets worse. The team evacuates him to a hospital in Canada. Doctors discover a blood clot. They try to treat it, but it's too late. 2 weeks later, Rick Creed is dead. The team is devastated. They've lost their chief engineer. They've lost a friend. And winter is coming. They're running out of time before the weather makes further work impossible. Greenland makes the hardest decision of the project. They'll have to leave. They'll come back next year and finish the job. But for now, they have to abandon the Key Bird for one more winter. The aircraft, so close to being airworthy, sits alone on the ice once again. Spring 1995, the final push. When the team returns in spring 1995, they have one goal: finish the restoration and fly the plane out before the next winter arrives. They complete the engine installation. They resurface the control surfaces, the ailerons, rudder, and elevators that have been damaged by years of Arctic weather. They test the engines. All 4 roar to life. After 47 years of silence, the Key Bird is alive again. They use the bulldozer to create a makeshift runway on the frozen lake, a long, flat strip of packed ice and snow. By May 21, 1995, everything is ready. The engines are running. The plane has been thoroughly tested. The fuel tanks are full. The weather is clear. Greenland climbs into the cockpit. The rest of the team takes their positions. They're going to fly this plane off the ice. They start the taxi run. The Key Bird begins rolling across the frozen surface, picking up speed. The engines thunder. The propellers spin, and then someone shouts, "Fire!" Section 5. 5 minutes of hell. It starts small. Just a wisp of smoke coming from the fuselage. But within seconds, it's clear this isn't a minor problem. Flames are visible. The smoke is getting thicker. The fuel can, here's what happened, a mistake so simple, so avoidable, that it's almost unbearable to think about. During the restoration, the team used a small auxiliary power unit, a generator, to provide electrical power when the main engines weren't running. This same generator had been used by the original crew back in 1947 to keep their radios powered. To fuel this generator, someone had placed a gas can near it. The can was designed to slowly drip fuel into the generator to keep it running. But during the bumpy taxi across the rough ice, the gas can came loose. Fuel started spilling onto the hot generator. And then it ignited. The inferno of the fire spreads with terrifying speed. The team tries to fight it. They grab fire extinguishers. They throw snow on the flames. But the fire has reached the fuel lines. It's spreading through the fuselage, feeding on 47 years of dry, preserved materials. Within minutes, the entire midsection of the aircraft is engulfed. Greenland and his team are forced to evacuate. They watch, helpless, as everything they've worked for burns. The fire reaches the wing fuel tanks. The heat is so intense that aluminum starts melting. The tail section collapses. The fuselage buckles and falls. By the time the fire burns itself out, consuming everything flammable, the key bird is destroyed. The wings are charred husks. The tail section has broken off and blown away. The fuselage is a twisted, blackened skeleton. In 5 minutes, the aircraft that survived 47 years in the Arctic is gone. The aftermath, the documentary crew filming the restoration, captures everything. Their footage shows Greenland and his team standing in the snow, watching the key bird burn. Nobody speaks. Some of them are crying. One team member later says, "We had it. We were so close. And then it was just gone." The team eventually evacuates. There's nothing left to save. The wreckage is left where it fell, a burned carcass on the frozen lake. The key bird, which had been worth millions of dollars, which had been one of the most perfectly preserved World War II aircraft ever found, is now worthless scrap metal. Section 6. The legacy today, the remains of the key bird still sit on that frozen lake in northern Greenland. In 2014, a Danish mineral exploration crew visited the site. They reported that the wreckage is scattered and deteriorating. The cockpit has sunk into the ice. The tail section has been blown across the lake by Arctic storms. NASA's P-3 Orion research aircraft occasionally flies over the site during Operation Icebridge missions. The wreckage is visible from the air, a dark scar on the white ice. But the key bird will never fly again. What we can learn: the story of the key bird teaches us something profound about ambition, perseverance, and the cruel randomness of fate. Darrell Greenland and his team did the impossible. They restored a 47-year-old bomber in the Arctic. They got it running. They were minutes from success. And they lost everything because of a gas can. Some people say the project was cursed from the start. Others say it was hubris. The idea that you could repair a World War II bomber on a frozen lake was always doomed to fail. But I think the real lesson is simpler. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. Greenland didn't make a major error. His team wasn't incompetent. They were skilled, experienced professionals who accomplished something no one thought possible. But in the end, one small oversight, a gas can left in the wrong place, destroyed everything. The documentary. There's a Nova documentary about the key bird called B-29, Frozen in Time. It's one of the most heartbreaking pieces of aviation media ever made. You watch the team work for months. You see their joy when the engines start. You feel their excitement as they prepare for takeoff. And then you watch the fire. You see their faces as they realize what's happening. You hear the silence as the flames consume 47 years of history. If you've ever worked on a project you cared about deeply, if you've ever been close to success only to watch it slip away at the last second, you'll understand why grown men wept that day on the ice. The other planes. Remember what I said at the end of the Leon Crane video? Between 1942 and 1945, over 300 aircraft crashed in Alaska and Greenland during World War II. The key bird is just one of them. And there are others that have never been found. Some of those planes carried secret cargo. Some were on classified missions. Some disappeared with their crews still aboard. And one of those planes, a C-47 transport nicknamed the $1 Million plane, vanished in 1944 carrying something the U.S. military desperately wanted to keep secret. When they finally found it 50 years later, buried under 300 feet of ice, what they discovered inside changed everything we thought we knew about World War II logistics in the Arctic. I cover that story in this video right here. You'll see why recovering this plane took 3 years. Why the military classified the entire operation, and what they found frozen in the cargo bay that made the entire mission worthwhile.